The new Apple MacBook Air 15-inch addresses a pertinent problem that most people haven't talked about. It fills a gap in Apple's existing lineup, which, until now, has been limited in choices, especially for certain buyers. For instance, for a buyer who is in the market for MacBook for daily use with mid-level performance and a large screen, the best offering in the lineup is the 13-inch MacBook Air. However, for someone specifically looking for a large screen laptop, a 13-inch screen isn't large enough. If they do look further, the next option is a 16-inch MacBook, which is a decently big screen size, but that sits in the Pro series. This means, you not only compromise on the portability you want with the Air series, but you will end up with a device whose performance is probably overkill for you, and you also end up spending upwards of 50,000 rupees just for those extra 2 inches. This is where the new MacBook Air 15-inch comes riding in like Clint Eastwood on a shiny brown horse. The MacBook Air 15-inch sits perfectly between the 13-inch MacBook Air and the 16-inch MacBook Pro. It's a, comparatively, light, large-screened, high-performing device, and you aren't forced to spend a huge chunk of extra money for a device that may not even be the best for you. I can say that if you are out to invest specifically in a MacBook, the new MacBook Air 15-inch will hit just the right spot for most people. But if you ask me, as much as I enjoyed the new 15-inch model, I would still choose the 13-inch MacBook Air. That was my personal takeaway in the last month of using the MacBook Air 15-inch. Let me set a little context for you here. My personal laptop is the M1 MacBook Air 13-inch. I have been using it for about 3 years. So, when I started reviewing the 15-inch MacBook Air, I primarily concentrated on finding answers to just 2 questions. How much value does the 15-inch display add? Should you go for a larger screened laptop? Left, M1 13-inch MacBook Air, right, M2 15-inch MacBook Air. Over the M1 MacBook Air, 13-inch, the MacBook Air 15-inch features an updated design, with more squared-off edges, instead of the classic thin sides of the Air series, which I personally preferred. The speaker grille has been removed, which was technically done with the last year's model, but it's a noticeable change if you are upgrading your MacBook after 2020. By the way, something you don't notice but the bigger size of the Air also creates more room for speakers, which aren't bigger, but there is a second set of subwoofers that Apple has added, which does make the sound better louder. There's also the cutout on the display that you can't miss, and I was hoping it features Face ID, but it just houses the webcam and a mic. There's a Touch ID on the keyboard, which is the same as the older MacBook Air. Also, a change that was quite significant for me is that Apple has moved to threaded cables and a MagSafe 3 port. You also can't miss the huge trackpad, which is as big as the Samsung Galaxy S23. And I am not complaining. Image credit, Nandini Yadav. There's also of course the difference of power. My 13-inch runs on the M1 chip, whereas, the new 15-inch Air runs the M2 SoC. That's right, not the new M2 Ultra or Max or Pro, the vanilla M2 chipset from last year. The model I used features an 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, 8GB memory, 256GB storage, and is priced at Rs 34,900. There's also a 512GB variant. The rest of the configuration remains the same, which is priced at Rs 54,900. Interestingly, if you look at the 13-inch MacBook Air with the M2 chip, it's as if the same configuration has been thrown into a bigger chassis. And that size upgrade costs you between 10,000 rupees to 20,000 rupees, depending on the variant you go for. The 15-inch MacBook Air is ideal if you don't have to travel with it daily. How much value does the 15-inch display add? As I mentioned at the beginning of the article, the MacBook Air 15-inch solves a really big and persistent problem in the Apple lineup. The device is functionally great, offers a large screen real estate, and is priced at a point that more people would be willing to spend. The 15-inch Air also has a pretty solid battery life, which lasts me somewhere between 12 to 14 hours, that's just a smidge better than the runtime I get on my M1 13-inch Air. However, If you ask me about the value addition of the 15-inch display to the laptop, I'd say it depends on what you are looking for. If you are looking to do a lot of multitasking, with split windows, on the system, or if you edit a lot of pictures or videos on the MacBook, the larger display helps for sure. If you have a fixed workstation or follow a work-from-home model, there are more reasons to like the 15-inch display than not. For someone like me though, my work involves a lot of multitasking, but it requires me to use apps in layers and not in stacks. So, when I started using the MacBook Air 15-inch, I absolutely loved that I had more screen real estate for everything. I also had a slightly bigger keyboard, which is always lovely. But, I quickly realized, everything was just bigger and not necessarily better. This realization grew stronger when I had to travel with the laptop. Because, while the laptop is lighter than its Pro counterpart, it's not actually light. The weight distribution of the laptop is also slightly biased towards the sides, which makes it somewhat challenging to carry around. Additionally, the 13-inch MacBook Air used to fit perfectly in most medium-sized tote bags, but the 15-inch doesn't. Which means, you need a separate sleeve or bag for it. I understand this may seem like a trivial issue, but for someone like me who has to carry the laptop back and forth from the office daily, any additional bag or weight added to the daily load is bothersome. Via Giphy. Should you go for a larger screen MacBook? The age-old size matters question is a good way to break this down. As they say, size doesn't matter, it's really all about what you want to do with it. Now, let's get your mind out of the gutter and hear me out. The 15-inch MacBook Air is a complete package, if I may say so. It's time to forget about gutters and minds. It's powerful, with a battery that comfortably lasts for a day or two. It boasts a beautiful display, a huge trackpad, louder speakers, and a sleeker, lighter design compared to even a 14-inch MacBook Pro. It also features the popular display notch and thinner bezels. What I am trying to say is that, for most people, the 15-inch MacBook Air makes a lot of sense. If you are a first-time MacBook buyer and the device meets your demands, you will not be disappointed. However, if you are someone looking to upgrade from a 13-inch model to a 15-inch purely for size, be aware that there isn't much difference besides the extra 2 inches.